It's better.
I'm Luis.
What?
Luis. My name is Luis. My question is about body sensations. Like I've hear some people say that not to pay attention to that, and I hear other people to say to kiss, to hug, to immerse yourself in your body sensations. Can you say a little bit about those two kind of different points of view? And
if you are enjoying a very nice wine or a very nice dinner, it's good to be immersed in the bodily sensations.
yeah.
Otherwise, why are you spending your money on nice wine and nice dinner if you don't taste it?
Well, I'm talking about more like tensions. Obviously, if you have a good sensation, you kind of just, oh, cool. But like, you know, the tensions, I hear people say you have to go towards them, or some people say don't even pay attention to them, they just come and go. Because we want to get rid of, you know, the tensions. But it's not like we could get rid of them, right? Because we can't really do anything.
It depends on what is the origin of the tension. Sometimes tensions are a good thing. If someone comes towards you with a knife in their hand and they look nasty, it's kind of normal to get tense. Don't you think so?
Yeah.
Because it prepares you to fight or to get the hell out of there, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I said it depends on the origin of the tension.
So you don't think the belief that you're a body creates tensions, and that we have to release those tensions in order to...
Well, if the belief that we are a body creates tensions, right? What we have to release is the belief that we are a body.
Yeah.
Because as long as this belief is not released, it will keep creating tensions, right?
Do you think there's a process to whatever you want to call it, like enlightenment? Do you see it as a process where, like you?
I
like,
don't know much about enlightenment, so.
Or realization, whatever you want to call.
Realization.
Recognizing your true
I'm
nature.
not interested in realization or in enlightenment. The only thing I'm interested in is happiness.
Do you think there's a process to happiness, like you went through? You weren't always happy, right?
Yeah, the process towards happiness is to get rid of the belief that we are our body.
That you're not happy? To get rid.
That we are the body.
That's the process. Can you describe that process? How do you see that process?
Investigate the truth of the belief that you, consciousness, are a body.
Investigate where the origin of the belief?
No, the truth of it, whether it's true or not. Ask yourself the question, am I a body?
Yeah, I think I'm not, but it's not obvious.
What?
It's not obvious. I think I'm not a body, but it's not obvious. So I think that's what I'm...
Well, it depends. In order to answer the question, am I a body or not, we have first to agree on what I am.
Yeah.
Right? Because if right off the bat I decide I am the body, right? Or I believe I am the body, this belief cannot be challenged because that's the basis from which I start. Mm-hmm. Right? So, let me ask you a different question. Are you hearing my words right now?
Am I hearing your words?
It seems like a difficult question.
It is. It is kind of a difficult question.
Yeah?
I mean,
Really?
in one sense I am, but in another sense I don't know who I or what I am. So I like
Yeah, but
just some. Yeah, I guess I am.
are you hearing my words? Yes or no?
Yes.
Or is it somebody else hearing your word, my words?
Say that again.
Or is it somebody else, a different entity in you, who is hearing my words?
No, I hear your words. I hear your words.
Okay. So you would agree that you are the one who is hearing my words, right?
Yes.
So this I is that, whatever that is, which is hearing my words. Whatever that is. You see, I didn't make any other assumption about this I other than it is that which is hearing my words. In particular, I didn't make the assumption that this I is a human body.
But what is there to know about that I? Is there anything that you have to know about it?
Well, you have to know what is the evidence that this I is a body. If you believe that this I is a body, this I which is hearing my words, you have to look for the evidence in support of this belief.
There is some evidence, right? There's a point of
Okay,
view.
go ahead. Give me your evidence.
That there's a point of view that if I were to...
A point of view is not an evidence. Give me your evidence.
That I'm a body. The point of view that... I think that most, for me, is the point of view that it feels, if I were... that there's too much correlation between, the sound and where I'm at. Because when I look at a tree and it kind of just moves, then it feels separate because there's no correlation between a thought. You know what I mean? Like
No.
Okay. The evidence is just the point of view, I would say. That it feels like there's a point of view so that I'm here and there's something going on over there.
In other words, are you saying that you seem that what you perceive is from a point of view which is localized in space at a very well-determined place?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Okay, here is a security camera.
Say that again, sir?
A security camera, do you see it here in the corner?
Yes.
Now, if someone looks at the video of this camera, from this video it will seem that the room is seen from this angle here, from this precise position. Does it mean that the image is seen from that position? It could be seen from Paris on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree?
Yes.
In other words, the perspective or the apparent location of the camera doesn't imply that the viewer is localized at the same place.
Okay.
No?
Yeah, I guess yeah.
Now, in this case, the viewer is you. Right? The viewer is you, not your body. You view through your body. Right? That's obvious too. I'm not challenging that. I'm not challenging that viewing takes place through the eyes, through the brain, through the optic nerve, the brain, etc. I'm not challenging that. Mm-hmm. But does that imply that you, the reality that perceives the images, are localized, and in particular that it is localized where? Behind your eyes?
Yeah, it doesn't, yeah. I'm not sure.
Ask yourself, how could I get evidence that the viewer is localized somewhere?
How can I get evidence that I'm localized somewhere?
No, that the viewer is localized somewhere. You'd say, how can I get evidence that this flower is localized on top of this table? By seeing both of them.
Yeah.
I see both of them, and I see that the flower is on top of the table, right?
Yes.
So, to have the certainty, or the evidence, that the flower, A, is localized on top of the table, B, I have to be able to see A and B simultaneously, right?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, in this case of the viewer and what is viewed, what is seen, in order to be able to see that the viewer is in this room, I should be able to see the room and the viewer in it. The viewer being consciousness. The problem with consciousness is that nobody has ever seen it.
Yeah.
Have you seen a consciousness is moving around? No.
Well, that is a problem because it's unknown, right? We just see.
No, it's not a problem. We are trying to get rid of false beliefs. That's it. It's not a problem to get rid of false beliefs. It's a good thing. It's never a problem.
It's because we can never find the subject.
Right.
We can only find objects, but we can never find a subject, but we still feel that there's a subject.
Yes, there is a subject, but we cannot find it in the same way as we find an object. Right?
Yes.
It doesn't mean we don't find it. It means we seem not to be able to find it in the same way.
How do we find it?
Well, do you know you are conscious?
Yes.
So you just found it.
For some reason, it's not satisfactory or obvious. It still feels like
satisfactory for whom? You ask a question, how do we find it? I show you experientially how to find it, and you say, I'm not satisfied. Why?
Because there's nothing there.
There is not a thing there.
Yeah.
Not a thing is not the same as nothing at all.
Mm-hmm. So it's more of...
there is consciousness there. Consciousness is not nothing. But it is not a thing such as a flower or a thought or an object. The absence of object doesn't mean absolute nothingness. It simply means no objects. It doesn't mean... The absence of a movie playing in a theater doesn't mean the absence of the theater. At 3 a.m., the theater is still there. No movies are playing.
Okay. So the process is just stop trying to look for the subject as much as just, I guess that's what they say, be in the now, more like...
No, the understand. The process is a process of understanding. How do we get rid from a false belief? By understanding the falsity of it. That's all.
To understand that...
How did you get rid of the belief in Santa Claus? Did it require an effort?
No.
No? However, you got rid of it at some age, perhaps 25.
Yeah. Yeah, so how do you get rid of a belief then? You just...
By understanding the falsity of it.
Yeah. It's just, yeah.
Right?
I mean, I feel like I understand the falsity of it, but it seems not to be enough for some reason. So it's
well, it means that you don't understand the falsity of it.
yeah. I mean, logically I do, but maybe it's more of an emotion.
But there is something. You don't even need to understand the falsity of it. You can understand the absence of evidence for it. It's a lesser threshold, right?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I don't need necessarily, as a first step, to understand the falsity of the belief that consciousness is dependent upon the body. But I can understand with the greatest clarity, and even more, with absolute clarity, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that there is no evidence that consciousness is dependent upon the body. That I can reach this understanding.
Mm-hmm. And you're saying that's enough?
Reach it first, before asking whether it's enough for what.
Yeah.
Enough for what? First, reach it and see where the path leads from there. Because that's easily achievable. Most people haven't achieved that understanding, which is easy to achieve.
Okay.
So, to see with absolute certainty that there is no evidence that our real identity, the consciousness that is hearing these words, the reality that is hearing these words in this moment, is limited or localized in space, localized in time, localized in or dependent on a body, etc., etc. No evidence whatsoever.
Can you throw in just free will for a second in there? Because I've heard you say that there's no free will, but it seems like you're saying that there is choices that I'm making to find liberation. Like there's free will. It's kind of like what you're saying, right? Or you're only talking from a relative point of view?
It depends. Free will for whom? Or for what? What is it that has freedom?
I mean, like the thing you just told me that where I have to just see that there's no evidence for a localization
of consciousness.
Yeah, who's doing that? I mean,
who cares? Find out the truth of it. Then, I mean, to answer the question, who's doing that? It's a vicious circle. You see, it's a kind of a catch-22, because if you want to ask this question before answering it, you are not going to move anywhere towards an understanding if you ask the question, who is it who understands?
Okay.
Understand first. Understanding comes first. When you understood the truth about Santa Claus, did you put as a precondition, before I understand whether Santa Claus exists or not, I have to understand who understands. No, you didn't put this precondition. And you nevertheless can rely on the conclusion you arrived at, the understanding you arrived at, right?
Yeah.
Who cares who understands, provided we understand, right? In France we say, who cares about the bottle, provided we get drunk. You see, so who cares who understands, provided we understand. Understanding is self-sufficient. Understanding is self-explanatory. Understanding is absolute. Self-evidence. You don't need to have any other explanation for self-evidence. Whatever is self-evident shines, and you don't need to ask any other questions. Otherwise, it wouldn't be self-evident. For instance, if I ask you, going back, the question, are you conscious?
Yes.
Do you need to understand who understands?
I suppose not.
No, I suppose. What does that mean? that means, does that mean perhaps? No? Does that mean there is a possibility that I am not conscious? Because that's what you imply by saying that. Is there any possibility left?
I think when I say suppose, I mean I don't understand what consciousness is.
It is whatever it is which is hearing these words right now. Okay? These words are being heard.
I can't wrap my mind around it. Yeah, it's beyond it's beyond understanding, isn't it? Or
it's beyond understanding. That the words are heard.
Yeah.
Is that complicated to understand?
Is it complicated?
That the words are heard? And that it is you who is hearing them, not somebody else?
Okay.
Isn't that obvious? Isn't that self-evident?
But there's a lot going on, isn't there? Like there's perceptions, there's feelings,
we are going on a tangent here. We have left the path.
But that's part of consciousness. It's consciousness, right? Because consciousness contracts.
No, consciousness is whatever is hearing these words right now.
But what about, aren't the words themselves also consciousness?
What?
The words themselves are consciousness. And the perceptions are also consciousness, and so it gets complicated.
No. You are making it complicated. The words are consciousness, but consciousness is not the words. The words are made of consciousness, but consciousness is not made out of words. That's a distinction. So when we say the words are consciousness, we don't put an equal sign between consciousness and the words. They are not synonyms. When we say the words are consciousness, we mean the true nature of the words is consciousness. But we don't mean the true nature of consciousness is words.
Okay, yeah.
So because we went into complications, so I am bringing you back to the essential, which is consciousness. So let's forget about the words for the time being. It has been dealt with.
Mm-hmm. You're basically saying that the objects are not important as...
I'm saying what I'm saying.
Uh-huh.
What I just said. I didn't say anything about the object not being important so far. So far, what I said is this, and that we can satisfy ourselves completely to agree that there is zero evidence that I, who is hearing these words, I'm limited, localized, or dependent upon anything else.
Okay, I'll start with that, yeah.
John, have you make sure everybody is muted? Because no more questions here. Emmerich says, talking about yoga, I have two questions about it. One, when I meditate, abiding knowingly as universal consciousness, it seems to have the same effects on my body as the yoga body contemplations. And I have to say that I prefer it. It seems more natural to me. Is it also a good yoga exercise, or shall I really alternate with yoga contemplations? I don't know what you mean by yoga body contemplations. And I don't know what you mean by when I'm to meditate, abiding knowingly as universal consciousness. So in order to answer, I'm going to try to define in my what I understand these two words or these two activities to mean. First, what does it mean to meditate, abiding knowingly as universal consciousness? It is a synonym of to abide knowingly as universal consciousness. So what does it mean to abide knowingly as universal consciousness? It means simply not to abide as anything limited, as anything, limited is fine. and not to abide as anything phenomenal. Because something can be unlimited but still phenomenal. The set of natural number is unlimited, but it is still phenomenal. So, not to abide as anything limited or phenomenal, or let's put it this way, not to abide as anything phenomenal, because anything phenomenal is somehow limited. For instance, a natural number is not a flower, so it is limited in that sense. So it is very different from what people usually construe as meditate, or even construe as abiding as universal consciousness, because they usually have the image of a nirvanic state. It's not that. It is simply the absence of the belief to be a separate entity. This form of meditation has a prerequisite, and the prerequisite is just what we discussed before, which is the understanding that there is no evidence that consciousness is separate. This understanding opens the door to this meditation, since there is no evidence whatsoever that compels us to believe to be a separate human body, or a separate human mind, or a separate and limited anything. We can simply remain in not knowing about what we are, without superimposing upon what we are limitations for which we have no evidence. So that's just being in not knowing about what we are is the same as my definition of abiding knowingly as universal consciousness. Now, coming to the second aspect, the yoga body contemplation. So I don't know where you come from. So the way I would take the yoga body contemplation will be an investigation that we conduct into the nature of the perceiver, of the bodily sensations. In this investigation, we kind of limit, for the purpose of efficiency, if you will, the scope of the investigation to the sole realm of bodily sensations. In other words, we are not interested in thought processes or external sense perceptions. And the question, because for every investigation there is a question, right? Did he or did she do it, right? That's a question. And in the case of this investigation, the question is, am I the body? I, the perceiver of the body, am I the body? In other words, I'm looking for evidence. But this form of evidence is not rational. We have this belief that our body is telling us something about consciousness, about ourselves, and that our body is telling us that we are limited. So this yoga body contemplation is the investigation of this belief. Does this contemplation give us evidence that we are the body? And we discover that as we allow for the body sensations to unfold, without any intervention of thought processes, without any intervention of the rational mind, the feeling systems in the body that led to the false conclusion that consciousness is dependent upon the body dissolve. It's a process called, in the Indian text, viveka, discrimination between the seer and the seen. The seen being the bodily sensations, the seer being consciousness. Consciousness disentangles itself from the bodily sensations and therefore recovers its autonomy, its independence. So as you can see from my explanation, if what you meant by yoga body contemplation, and if what you meant by abiding knowingly as universal consciousness corresponds to my definition, the yoga exercise is the application of the meditation to a restricted realm, the realm of bodily sensations. It is like focusing the attention onto an area that kind of requires it, because that's an area in which ignorance has deep roots. But eventually, ultimately, this restriction should be lifted. And in the meditation, abiding knowingly as universal consciousness, all realms are welcomed and accepted without any trace of focusing. So these two methods are not equal, but if properly accomplished, the yoga accelerates the process of stabilization. Second question. During these meditations, I feel like standing up sometimes as I have tensions around the belly, hips, and perineal area. Are there some good breathing exercise postures to do while standing? Well, there are, but you can also go to the fridge and have a beer.
Francis, can I ask another question? I feel I experience suffering because I feel like there's things that are happening, but I don't know their origins, or I don't know why those things are happening. Do you know what I mean? Like there's things happening, but I don't know exactly what's happening or why it's happening, or where it's coming from. So it's a state of unknown or confusion, or so it's kind of a state of suffering. And when I try to investigate where they...
Wait a minute. You say you are suffering because you have no explanation for what's happening?
Yes.
So that if you had an explanation, you would suffer less? For instance, if you have a toothache, is a good explanation of the reason for your toothache, does that alleviate your suffering, or do you prefer to go to the dentist or to take some painkiller?
Wait, can you say that again? That if I have a toothache...
The point is, I'm not sure that a good explanation for the suffering alleviates the suffering. A good explanation for the origin of the suffering may lead to its resolution. But if I know where the problem is, it doesn't alleviate my suffering. If I am very thirsty, to know where the source is from which I can drink is not sufficient to eliminate my thirst. Mm-hmm. Right? I need to drink in order to do that. Right? Mm-hmm. So, to have a good explanation for my suffering is a good step, but it's not sufficient. Mm-hmm. Now, I have a good explanation for the suffering for you. I'm talking about psychological suffering now, not toothaches. Uh-huh. You can convince yourself by looking at your reasons for suffering that without any exception, every time you experience psychological suffering, it's only because you believe to be a human body. That's it. Now, if you're not convinced, give me an example then of psychological suffering which doesn't come from this origin.
It doesn't feel good to not know what's happening.
Well, sometimes it feels good. I mean,
uncertainty doesn't feel good. I don't know where the origin of things are, because people say it's consciousness, and that's just, what is that? The origin of everything is it just...
Your girlfriend has invited you for dinner at her place. That's the first time. And she says, I have a surprise for you. You don't know what's going to happen. Does it make you suffer?
I would like to know what's going to happen,
You are beyond redemption. The problem is not that we don't know. That's just the opposite. We know too much. We know that we are a separate body, and that's the source of the problem. It's not that we don't know enough. It's that we know too much. So to be happy is not that we need more knowledge, but less false knowledge.
Lately, I've been reading a little bit of the Ashtavakra Gita. And reading it, there's some kind of very wonderful thing that happens. There's a settling down of my system. The qualities that are in there seem to be growing. It says something along the lines of worship, compassion, contentment, truth, politeness, things like that. And I'm fascinated with how just reading it, these things get inculcated in me. And I was wondering if you could explain how that can happen just by putting attention on it like that.
It comes from the heart, it speaks to the heart. But in order to hear it, you need already to be open to it. So in order to see the beautiful plant, you need to get rid of the weed around it, so that it's no longer hidden by the. It's the same. So here, using logic, we clear the weed and the brushes. It's a kind of menial task, you know.
I had an insight.
Hard labor.
The other day I had this insight that underlying the surface of my personality, of myself, there's this, I call it like a force of evolution that is, I guess, consciousness that is responsible for waking me up. And there's nothing that my personality can do to keep it from happening or to make it happen any faster. And it just, is that correct, that it's consciousness coming to consciousness, that it's the happiness is consciousness's happiness, so if we go for happiness, we're going for consciousness?
Yes. I say that only to those who have understood that consciousness and happiness is the same. I wouldn't say that to anybody who believes that happiness and possession of an object is the same.
So I heard you say one time that somebody was talking about money, and you said the only thing stupider than going for a lot of money is going for a small amount of money. And
I don't remember saying that. But it's true.
but if the idea of being more prosperous brings happiness and joy, then
it may
that
have
would
been
be...
Laura who said that.
I'm sorry? Oh, okay.
Because I've heard say that it doesn't take much more work to go for $1 million as it does to go for $1,000. Sometimes people toil more for, let's say people who flip houses, right? If you buy a fixer-upper for $100,000 and you work for 2 months to fix it up, very hard labor, right? And you sell it back for 150,000. You make 50,000 in the process. If you buy a fixer-upper for 300,000, and you spend 3 months fixing it because it's a little bigger, right? But you sell it for 450, then you make $150,000. And if you buy a company fixer-upper, by borrowing from your bank for 0 because it's bankrupt almost, and then you bring it back into business, then the sky is the limit. In the same amount of time, in the same amount of effort. So I think what I just said has nothing to do with spirituality, it's just practicality, right? So don't bring about what we say here, right? Sometimes I say things that have nothing to do with...
Well, the reason I ask is an analogy. The only thing stupider than trying to go for happiness would be trying to go for unhappiness.
That's true.
So go for happiness.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
You see, talking about the Ashtavakra Gita, I haven't read it in a long time. But there is just a little verse in the beginning, towards the beginning, that say, "Wipe not you, O noble soul, stop crying, O you noble soul." Already this verse, when I was reading that, I started crying, of course, because it's so beautiful. It touches you deeply because it says, well, you are a noble soul. Everybody is a noble soul. Everybody is a consciousness. So it speaks directly to the nobility in us, to the consciousness in us. You see, and these are very simple words, but it goes beyond logic and rationality. You see, it's more some kind of poetry, if you will, that touches us, because it comes from this place. Ashtavakra was a good guy. Yes?
I think you just answered my question. What I was going to say is that I'll watch some movies or a show or something where the character finds a deeper strength in themselves, a deeper courage in some way, shape, or form, and I'll find myself convulsing in tears. like it's touching me in a way that I wasn't sure about, and it seems like it's just what you just said, that there's something
Yes.
that's about me that I haven't been touching before that's being
Yes.
opened up,
Yes.
because I like that spot. Thank you.
Both the ignorant and the truth lover cry, but these are different tears.
Yeah, Francis, for some reason, much of this dialogue reminds me of a recording I heard a long time ago from Krishnamurti, J. Krishnamurti. And people kept pressing him, what's your path and so forth. And, he kept trying to evade it, saying there's no path. Just pay attention, be curious, be relaxed. And pay attention, which kind of seemed contradictory, but they're not. But then when he was pressed, well, what's the best spiritual teaching? He said all of them, basically all of them and none of them. But what I remember, what catches my, the point of the question is he said, any spiritual teaching, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, that you don't instantaneously understand as, yes, that's true, is poison. In other words, let it go. It's only going to become mind. That will become a path. That will become, time and something to figure out. Vice, that instantaneous knowing when you hear it. And anything that's not that is poison, at least initially. It's kind of like what he was pointing at. Should be approached. In other words, if you don't understand something, don't worry about it, and go with what you know intuitively. That's no ifs, ands, or buts, and that always stuck out in my mind in terms of the who that knows, the mind vice the, if you could comment on that at all, because we kind of talked about that today. A little bit.
Krishnamurti was never the disciple of an authentic teacher. So he had some deep intuitions, and at the same time a lack of clarity. His denial of all the existing traditions, like he was the only one, was kind of upsetting.
It made it very difficult to follow, extremely difficult.
And I asked him the question once, well, what's the difference between your teaching? You use different words for consciousness and the teachings of Advaita. And he kind of made fun of Advaita in his answer, saying, well, he told me, sir, do you believe that the starvation in the world is a dream? Sir, do you believe that the wars in the world Sir, do you believe that the misery? I had read all of his books many times when I asked him this question. And I didn't convince me. So he lacked the experience, actually. So coming back to your question, it's not necessarily poison. The fruit is poisonous if it comes from a poisonous tree. But if you take the fruit from a good tree, the fruit may be not ripe enough to be eaten right away, but you can take it in your pocket, and sometimes you will eat it later when it will be ripe at home. You see? In the tradition of Vedanta, first you hear the truth from the lips of the Guru. And something gets to you at that moment because the words come from a place of truth. And there is something in you that knows it. That's the point that Krishnamurti was missing. It's called the power of the mantra. The mantra in and by itself is nothing, but it requires to be transmitted in the proper fashion from the proper source. So the words, when they come from the source, have a power. You may not understand them right away, but because they were transmitted with the power, you'll think about them. And that's the second step. First, you hear the words. Then you meditate on them, meaning you think about it. And then you understand them. And that's called dhyana. Meditation is the understanding of the words of the Guru. Sometimes years may separate the hearing from the understanding, and sometimes it's simultaneous. Sometimes you may be listening to your Guru, and before the words are uttered, you hear them within. That's a great mystery when it happens.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with your assessment on Krishnamurti. I think the guy was, I had some superb insights, but he just disregarded so many centuries of all traditions, pretty much. Really did.
Nina. Yeah, later. Can you help me understand, realize, and experience consciousness absent of objects such as the body and the mind? You say consciousness is what is hearing these words. When my body and my mind were anesthetized during brain surgery, I would not have been hearing your words had you been present. I sense that if I can experience consciousness without the mind and the body, there no longer will be any fear of death because only the body and the mind expire, but consciousness never dies. If I am that which cannot be perceived, how can I experience it or consciousness? I'm very green and new at this. Thank you for your patience. The way by which... Okay. it is true, then when your body and mind are anesthetized, you cannot hear the words, even if I had been present, yes. And you say, I sense it, that if I can experience consciousness without the mind and the body, and you say, if I am that which cannot be perceived, how can I experience it or consciousness? Okay. When I say that consciousness cannot be perceived, I mean it cannot be perceived as a thought, as a bodily sensation, or as a sense perception. Something we hear, something we see, taste, smell, or touch. It doesn't mean it cannot be perceived at all. Quite the contrary, in fact. If I ask you, are you conscious? You're likely to say yes. If I ask you, do you say yes from hearsay and from experience? You're likely to say, I say yes from experience. Now, you have to investigate the experience from which you know that you are conscious. And here is a hint for you in your investigation. We don't know that we are conscious from the perception of objects, but from the perception of consciousness alone. We believe we know we are conscious because we perceive objects. We believe that we infer the presence of consciousness from the presence of objects. That would be true if objects would come first and consciousness second. But consciousness has to be present for us to perceive objects. So consciousness comes first. Therefore, consciousness cannot be inferred from the presence of objects. Consciousness knows itself directly, without any agent, without any intermediary. You have to be open to this possibility. It's not something that is extraordinary, because all human beings know that they are conscious. Only a few know that they are conscious through direct experience. Most of them believe they are conscious, they know that they are conscious only because they perceive objects. Now, if we know that we are conscious out of an experience which is not objective, what kind of experience is it? You see? The experience of consciousness, knowing itself, is of a different kind. So be open to that. Investigate your own experience. Don't hesitate to come back with objections, because objections will present themselves to you. That say, no, that's not possible, because. That's the function of a teacher, to address these objections in a satisfactory manner. So that's the responsibility of the teacher. Okay.
Hi, Francis. You have often walked us through the contemplation of space and time. That's something I keep coming back to. You'd say that what is between two events is consciousness. And I was wondering if that has a connection with the continuity of being, or the sense of continuity, which is...
Yes, it's the same.
So you're saying that the sense of continuity is what appears as time.
There is only one thing which is continuous, which is reality. Everything else comes and goes, and therefore is discontinuous. There is only one thing that is. The rest merely exists. And that which exists comes into existence and goes out of existence, and is therefore impermanent. And that as it comes into existence or goes out of existence, there is a discontinuity, of course.
So I guess I'm just integrating this contemplation over time, and this is something that came naturally, that the sense of the passage of time has something to do with this ever-present sense of continuity whenever I check. You had also said that what appears between two events is consciousness, because we don't see time or experience time directly, and that what is between two objects is space, and because objects are events in themselves, space itself is consciousness. And I guess my question
our
is...
Our experience of space and our experience of time is consciousness, is the experience of consciousness. That's all I'm saying. That our subjective experience of space and time is in fact the experience of consciousness. Now, there is objective space-time, the space-time of scientists, the space-time of the world. And it's only normal that physicists discover that they are not independent. Because what it would mean if they were independent would mean that there would be two independent realities, right? So the moment we understand that there is only one reality, it's only natural for space and time, at some point, not to be independent. But we have to go beyond that, and the reality of space and time, whatever this reality is, and the reality of our mind, in other words, the reality of our human experience, are the same. You see, so that's when non-duality comes in. We have to, in a way, liberate consciousness from our belief that it is some kind of a super mind. We have to restore, to emphasize the reality, quality of consciousness. In other words, we cannot make it up. Consciousness or consciousnessing is real in this moment, right? It is absolutely real. Whatever is perceived is at best as real as the consciousness that perceives it. So this, and then we have to tie that to our intuition that there is only one reality. Then consciousness has to be that reality. To put it in religious terms, to understand that it's okay to say, okay, I am this body, I am this human body, or I am this human soul, this human mind. But the reality that perceives in it, the consciousness in it, is the divine spark, meaning it is God who perceives. Nobody else than God perceives. That's the important point. Then you can be religious as much as you want. You see, provided you give only God the power to perceive. Provided you see God as the only reality. Let's put it differently. There is no other reality than God. Okay? Therefore, the reality that perceives is God, since there are no other realities than God. You see? If only all religions could agree on that, I would be very happy to become the most religious person. You know? The problem of religions is that they have two realities, or more than one reality, and that God is not the only reality.
This morning I was reading kind of a Sufi quote from Ibn Arabi, and I think he said pretty much what you were expressing. That the giving of understanding and the receiving of it are both by God.
Yeah. Yes. It's God in us who understands. It's God who gives the grace and who receives the grace. The grace is something too sacred to be received by anything else than God herself.
In this earlier contemplation, I guess one of the questions I have is because I keep coming back to this foundational objects of space and time, and you said it's to connect it. You emphasize, I understand you emphasize the reality of consciousness. I was wondering if the purpose of this contemplation is just to create this openness, because I feel like I keep going back to it as if I can go further, but it just seems like I reach a stop.
I would recommend to always start from what you have understood. And to fully see the implications. Start from that which you are absolutely certain of, and move from there, because there are implications, and you'll be surprised how many there are. Our problem is that we don't see them right away. And then that we don't want to see others. Implications. Some we don't see right away because of belief systems we have adopted, and others we don't want to see because our attachment to other belief systems. So, but at least to start from a place of certainty is very important.
I feel that one certainty that seems to, or conviction that seems to be deeper and deeper, is that there is only one reality. It's like,
well, that's enough. You don't need anything else.
But it seems like it's being tested more and more. It's like being in a hot space, because so many things seems to challenge that, but that conviction is what I seem to rely on. Thank you.
There are a few questions from Mahmoud. I sometimes experience peace in thoughts and body when listening, watching you or Rupert, while not paying much attention to the words that you are saying. Is this because of what you call silent transmission? Yes, since it is not based on the words. No, but yes. Yes. I would experience that with my teacher. Sometimes I wouldn't listen to the words, and sometimes he would do a gesture with his hand, and it would go very deeply in me. So another question from Mahmoud, who lives in a place where it is difficult to be a truth lover. Recently, I can notice that peace and happiness are prevailing life more and more. Sometimes it is revealed after spontaneous and honest investigation in the form of deep quietness in thoughts and melting in the body. But more often, I notice it in hindsight as absence of contractions in the body, absence of worries in the mind, and more openness to whatever is happening. Thoughts of ignorance could come, but in most cases they don't make much sense and thus have no power. But ignorance still visits from time to time. It's mostly felt as contractions in the body. Suffering is becoming more noticeable, undesirable, and unbearable. I sometimes feel like I am addicted, for the lack of words, to happiness and want more of it, which sounds contradictory. do the effects of happiness on the body-mind deepen over time? Yes. Another question from Mahmoud. He says, might seem irrelevant to Advaita, but you can consider it as a celebratory question. In your opinion, who plays most beautifully among these tennis masters? Federer, Djokovic, Nadal, and why? Beautifully, Federer, no contest. Okay, another question from Mahmoud. Reality can experience itself in many flavors: truth, love, beauty, peace, happiness, humor, life, aliveness, etc. Are all of these actually one thing called by different names? Or is it the case that reality has distinct qualities? And if so, doesn't it make reality dualistic? Not necessary. A coin has two sides, but it's still one coin. The two sides of a coin don't make it dualistic. It would be what is dualistic would be two coins. Or is it the case that reality has distinct qualities? Yes, reality has distinct qualities, but these qualities are not objective qualities. They are non-phenomenal. Phenomenal qualities like color, blue, red, white, small, big, square, round, bitter, sweet, etc. Loud, soft. These are phenomenal qualities. They have opposites. But the noumenal qualities correspond to the 100 names of God. They have no opposites, really. We have given them opposites, but they don't. For instance, being or reality. It's a quality of the Absolute. Only the Absolute has being, only the Absolute is real. Now you could say, well, but then there is an opposite. Not being. Nothingness. To which I say no. Why? Because non-being doesn't exist. It's an opposite in name only, but it's not a real opposite. Because the non-being doesn't exist, because being is. The fact that being is, in this moment there is something rather than nothing, therefore being is. Non-being is simply an intellectual concept, but it doesn't exist. So there is no real duality between being and not being. So you see that not only is reality not dualistic, but also the noumenal qualities of it have no opposites. Dory, eye consciousness can only perceive through one single body apparatus located in time and space. No, it perceives through all bodies and all kinds of apparatuses. So I go on. reading, meaning I can only and uniquely perceive from right here, right now. No. If my perception was not restricted to one uniquely point in time and space, it would have been easier to establish that consciousness is not limited. No. Because such an experience, no matter how fleetingly, happens in the case, for instance, of thought transmission. In an experience of thought transmission, fleetingly, I see somebody else's mind. But then, the interpretation is not that there is only one reality. The interpretation is that some kind of communication gets established behind the scenes between two separate individuals. So even if you were able to experience, to see from two minds at the same time, you wouldn't necessarily draw this conclusion. Why cannot I perceive from multiple locations simultaneously in time and space? What makes you so certain you don't? The fact that you don't remember doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Please, would you repeat the security camera example? I have missed it. Well, I was simply making the point that when one remotely look at a monitor, the one who sees the scene is not localized in the room. That's all. Mary. Experimenting with the idea of being everywhere and nowhere, I try to make it my experience instead of it being an abstract concept. Placing my attention somewhere between the head and the heart in an effort to try and delocalize it. To my surprise, it seemed to become an intimate feeling as opposed to the abstract feeling it had been up to now. However, I don't quite understand how for something to become delocalized and yet remains intimate. Is it that consciousness is becoming more intimate because I have only seen it as something way out there in the universe? Would love to hear some insights as regard this delocalization process. Well, if you place your attention somewhere between the head and the heart, it may be interesting as an exercise, as a yoga exercise, to disturb the automatic localization in the head or in the chest. So that's a yogic exercise through which we try to change the patterns of the body and of the mind. This type of exercise shouldn't be repeated for extended periods of time. Once they are like a can opener. Once the can has been opened, you don't need the can opener any longer, and you just eat the content of the can. Now, to see consciousness as something way out there in the universe, then what you meant by consciousness is something different from what I mean by it, because what I mean by it is the person who is hearing these words, you. And that's not out there in the universe, that's very much where you are, here. But then, to see this here-ness as being everywhere in the universe. Sylvie. I am translating from the French. I meditate every day, and I experience a fire that gradually burns the remains in all the nook and crannies of my body and of my heart. Although this process gets amplified, increases, and as a result, I should be happy about that. I experience a tremendous failure, a feeling of debacle in my personal life. And I'm under the impression of standing in the midst of a desolated field of destructions. Where does this feeling come from, which seems to increase the duality? I think, Sylvie, that I wouldn't meditate for a while, because there is something that you're doing wrong. And I would try to focus on understanding instead of doing. Give yourself a break and see what happens. Give yourself a break. Live your life and be open to new insights that will come as you live your life. To meditate like that is not living your life. It's an effort by someone to get something. It's business as usual. That's why you have this feeling of failure. We shouldn't have a feeling of failure when we move on the path. When we move on the path, we should move from certainty to the next certainty. From understanding to the next understanding. And as a result, the experience should be one of a continuous harmonization and a continuous increase in happiness. You should feel at some point that your life is converging towards happiness. So there is no point keeping a practice if you don't have the results. Okay, thank you.